Welcome, everyone, to The Wandering Jew, based on the book from Rav Yitzchak Ginsburgh. For those who have it, we're going to start at page 125. 125, we're finishing up the section called Torah. And then tonight we'll be able to go into the section called Commandments. We begin with a very, call it basic and fundamental, foundational idea that is very, very important for anyone who really wants to understand Kabbalah and Chassidut to understand this. It's called Why 10. There are 10 Sefirot, divine emanations or channels of creation. Why 10? Classic question. Why aren't there 30 Sefirot? Why aren't there 5 Sefirot? Why 10? So Rav Ginsburgh answers, because 10 is the sum of the first 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4. The number 10 is called the triangle of 4. For those who have been following these teachings, this is something that has come up, the triangle of a number. So if we say the triangle of 4 is 10, means 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. The triangle of 7, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 equals 28. Each of these, of course, are very, very significant. But here, this is a very, very important one, as he's about to explain. So in other words, so why are there 10 Sefirot? Is because it's connected to the idea of 4. In other words, 10 is the triangle of 4. Now, what is special about 4? So that begs the question. Okay, there are 10 Sefirot. There's 10 commandments. Avram was tested 10 times. There are 10 plagues. There's 10 utterances of creation. But like bottom line, common denominator, what's behind the significance of 10? So he says it's 4. So he says, what's special about 4? We could answer that God's essential name, Havaya, or the Tetragrammaton, has 4 letters, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. So we're getting closer to an answer here. Why is 10 so significant? Is because it's a triangle of 4, and 4 is the number of letters in God's name. But Rav Ginsburgh says, but this only begs the further question. What's so special about 4 that God's name is 4 letters? So little by little, he's trying to get us to the deeper understanding here. So he says like this, 4 is the first evidently square number, 2 squared. Then in parentheses, he says 1 is also a square number, but it's its own square. In other words, 1 squared is still 1. 2 is the first number that when you square it, it becomes 4. In Kabbalah, a square number, so called because it can actually be drawn as a square, portrays the principle of inter-inclusion. So now he's getting to a deep understanding here. In other words, 4 is the first number that is an inter-included number, meaning 2 squared. And he's explaining, when we talk about a square number, you can draw it. In other words, 2 squared is 4, so you'd have 2 dots on the top, 2 dots on the bottom, a square. If it's 3 squared is 9. So you can draw it. 3 dots, 3 dots, 3 dots, a square. So he's just explaining some simple mathematics. But here we've mentioned the idea of inter-inclusion numerous times. But here Rav Ginsburgh is really revealing the most essential understanding of inter-inclusion is that God's name is of 4 letters because it represents inter-inclusion. The oneness of God inter-includes everything. That's the idea here. When we say that 2 or more things are inter-included, we mean that each contains something of the other. Thus, when they come together to create a whole, the whole is reflected in each of the parts. That is what inter-inclusion is. Inter-inclusion is you have 2 things and they're inter-included, means that there is a synergy. There's a energy transference. For example, the example we always bring is Sefirot to Omer. And so if it's Gevura Sheba Chesed, it means that the Gevura has a little bit of Chesed and the Chesed has a little bit of Gevura. That is what inter-inclusion means. And so God's name being the first number 4 that represents inter-inclusion is telling us, because we always say God is one. But what the one means that it inter-includes everything. Everything is inter-included in the oneness of God. Okay, now he goes on and he says, for example, there are 2 main types of intellect: wisdom, Chochmah, and understanding, Binah. But mature wisdom contains an element of understanding, and mature understanding contains an element of wisdom. Now, he doesn't mention this. Oh, okay, he does actually. Thus, from 2 types of intellect, we arrive at 4. How? These 4 types are known as the wisdom within wisdom, understanding within wisdom, wisdom in understanding, and understanding in understanding. That is how they're all included. And actually, he doesn't mention this, but the source of this is in Sefer Yetzirah. And Sefer Yetzirah, which so many basic concepts of Kabbalah come from Sefer Yetzirah. So in Sefer Yetzirah, it says, be wise in understanding and understanding in wisdom. So that's the source. And I believe that's why he chose wisdom and understanding as his example here. This is why the concept of inter-inclusion is captured geometrically in the form of a square. And the first square is the number 4. That's what he's trying to explain to us. Likewise, God's essential 4-letter name depicts inter-inclusion. It contains 2 masculine letters, Yud and Vav, and 2 feminine letters, the 2 Heys. So now he takes it like one step deeper here, is within these 4 letters themselves, there's a type of inter-inclusion. So there are 2 letters that are considered, we'll call it more of the masculine energy, the Yud and the Vav, and the 2 Heys are the more feminine letters. But they're not together. First there's a Yud, and then there's a Hey. Then there's a Vav, and then there's a Hey. So it's masculine, feminine, but they're all inter-included. And then he said, I'm not for those who have the book, the next part is a little bit complicated. So I'm just going to explain one of the ideas on the outside, which is a very, very beautiful idea. So then he asks, so if 10 is the triangle of 4, and 4 is the first square, now what is the triangle of 10? Because we're saying that number 4 and 10 are intrinsically connected together. And that's why, for example, when we talk about the 10 utterances through which the world is created, well, these 10 utterances are the 10 Sefirot. And one second. And so we already know that 4 and 10 are intrinsically connected. And that's why when we look at the physical world and we try to describe it, so many of the descriptions are in 4s. The 4 seasons, the 4 directions, the 4 elements, the 4 forces that modern science says is the basics of all creation: gravity, the electromagnetic force, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. And it goes on. Many, many more descriptions of 4s. So here is a deep connection that the world is created through 10 utterances. But then when we look at the world, we see it really manifests the number 4. And the 4 manifests inter-inclusion. So now Rav Ginsburgh asks, so we know that the triangle of 4 is 10. What is the triangle of 10? So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 10 equals 55. What is 55? Here he says Kallah, bride. But the same letters are Hakol, everything. So again, we have this idea that the world is created through 10 utterances. And these are the basic building blocks, the 10 Sefirot, and they include everything. That's the inter-inclusion. Everything is included. But here he says Kallah, bride. And so then he takes it one step further. And this is actually brought down, I believe, in the Zohar. Yes, in the Tikkunei Zohar. I mentioned already that Sefer Yetzirah, almost all the basic fundamental principles of Kabbalah are mentioned in Sefer Yetzirah and in Tikkunei Zohar. The Tikkunei Zohar is just brimming with classic kabbalistic principles. So one of the things that Tikkunei Zohar does is if you take 10, because Tikkunei Zohar is all about the word Bereshit, in the beginning, creation. And again, creation comes through 10 utterances. So Tikkunei Zohar does a very fancy, complicated mathematical idea here. It says, if you square all of the numbers between 1 and 10, what do you get? This is from the Tikkunei Zohar. In other words, 1 squared plus 2 squared plus 3 squared plus 4 squared. So it's 1 plus 4 plus 9 plus 16. And you go all the way up to 10. 10 squared is 100. You get 385, which is Gematria Shechinah. So here, that's why Rav Ginsburgh brought Kallah. In other words, the triangle of 10 equals bride. The square of the first 10 numbers equals the Shechinah. And we know that the Shechinah is the immanent presence of God in the world. It's called the Shechinah. And again, that includes everything. But it also tells us that, remember, we said in God's name, there's male and then female, male and female. Yud and then Hey, that's male and female. Vav and Hey, male and female. But in relationship to God, all of creation, especially humanity, is all the feminine. All of creation is the feminine. And this answers why, especially in an age of pronouns, why we refer to God as He. Even though we know in our tradition that God is not a He and is not a She, and yet has both elements. That's why the Arizal crafted this idea. One second here. One second. Crafted. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Whoa. I had to do something technical here and I lost my train of thought. All right. That's why we refer to God as the He, because we are all the She. Every human being, all of creation is the feminine, is the Kallah in relationship to God. Okay, so that was the first one. It got pretty kabbalistic here, but I really think Rav Ginsburgh is in a simple manner was trying to explain to us the importance of the numbers 4 and 10 and their connection. So we see 10 every place in the Torah, in holiness, in creation, and we see the number 4 everywhere in creation and in God's name. And so here, Rav Ginsburgh was trying to help us understand the intrinsic connection between these two ideas. Okay, now we're going to a new section called Commandments. For those who have the book, we're on page 129. So he begins with one of his two-sentence tweets. He says, when lifted, our hands ascend above our head. And when lowered, they can descend below the feet. In other words, if you bend down, you can put your hands literally under your feet. Action connects heaven and earth. Why? Because hands represent action. You can do actions in different ways, but hands represent action. So here he's saying, again, it sounds very simple what he's saying, but what he's saying is something very profound, is hands go up and hands go down. But what does that mean? And since hands represent action, action is supposed to connect above and below. That's the idea. We might think that they're like two different realms. If I'm acting, it's very practical in this world. But we know that with every action that we take, this is a concept called kavanah, intent. So every action that we take, if we have a spiritual thought behind it, it is literally connecting heaven and earth. That's the symbol of the ladder in Yaakov's dream. It's a physical ladder, but it's connecting heaven and earth. Okay, now for his first short little word here. It's called 3 Toils. Service of God requires toil. There are 3 toils: Mitzvot, prayer, and Torah study. Now, he's not sourcing this, but right at the beginning of Pirkei Avot, it says the world stands on 3 things: on Torah, Avoda, and Gemilut Chasadim. And these are really the 3 he's saying. Torah study is Torah, of course. Prayer is Avoda. Avoda is service. And mitzvot, that's Gemilut Chasadim. That among the most important mitzvot are doing acts of kindness. So he says that when we serve God, it requires action, toil. And the 3 toils are mitzvot, prayer, and Torah study. So he says like this: mitzvot are the service of the body. They rectify our life force, the nefesh. Why? Is because almost all of the mitzvot, except for really just a few, all entail a physical action, a physical object, or speech. And speech is considered like a physical action. So that's what he says. Mitzvot are the service of the body. They rectify our life force, our nefesh. The nefesh is considered the lowest level of soul. It's the soul that's most attached to the body. Then he says, prayer is the service of the heart. It rectifies our spirit, the ruach. That's the next level of soul. Nefesh and then ruach. Torah study is the service of the mind. It rectifies our soul, our neshama. So here, in a very simple manner, Rav Ginsburgh is helping us understand how to fix the different levels of our soul. He doesn't get to Chaya or Yechida. Here, he's just talking about doing mitzvot, and that is a tikkun for our nefesh. Prayer is a tikkun for our ruach, our spirit, our heart. And here he's saying body, heart, and mind. And Torah is helping fix our neshama, our mind. Again, it's relatively a very simple idea. But if anyone ever wondered, we have 5 levels of soul. How do I fix them? How do I refine them? How do I improve them? How do I get in touch with them? So here, Rav Ginsburgh is giving us an answer. You want to connect, fix, improve, refine, purify your nefesh? Do mitzvot. You want to, same thing, purify, fix, improve your heart? Prayer. And if you want to refine, sharpen your mind, learn Torah. So that's his idea here. The next one is called meditation, prayer, and action. Remember, this whole section is called commandments. Here, he's little by little going to give us many, many, many different perspectives about doing mitzvot and what goes into proper observance of mitzvot and what mitzvot can do for us. When we do a mitzvah, we are doing for God. That's how we serve God. But God gave us the mitzvot also because they're good for us. So we're just at the beginning of different perspectives on doing mitzvah. The next one, meditation, prayer, and action. Consummate service of God unites meditation. Here he's using the word hit bonanut, prayer, tefillah, and action, ma'aseh. They complement one another. Together, they equal a square number, a sign that these three words are perfectly complementary. Now, we should know by now that Rav Ginsburgh is an expert in mathematics, and he is one of the, actually, probably the greatest innovator of Torah mathematics in history. There's really no one who has so all-encompassingly united almost every Torah thought with mathematics. So these three words together, and he doesn't even put what the total is. Someone could maybe do this on their calculator, that hit bonanut, tefillah, and maaseh equal 43 squared. So if anyone could just do a quick 43 square and put it in the chat, and I'll try to see the chat. But what he's trying to say here is something very important, that when you have words or verses whose numbers add up to square numbers, what did we learn in the first Torah? A square number is a number of inter-inclusion. So if you have 1,849, thank you, Stuart, 1,849, 43 squared. But listen to this idea here. In other words, when two words or verses added together equal a square number, it's telling us already that there's some aspect of inter-inclusion between these two words or phrases or verses. Now, this is very, very connected to another concept that is called soulmate verses. It's a very, very fascinating thing. Anyone who has my book, 70 Faces, I have a whole section about this, and it's connected to the song we listened to at the beginning. In other words, if you look through the whole Tanach, sometimes you'll find verses in completely different, they could be in completely different books, or they could be in the same book, or they could be in the same Torah portion, and they complement each other, not necessarily numerically, but theme-wise. And so the only one I'm going to give an example of is the song we heard before, is Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. But that's from Song of Songs, Shir Shirim. But also in Shir Shirim is Dodi li v'ani lo. So again, Dodi, Ani l'dodi, I am to my beloved. In other words, I'm initiating. I am to my beloved. And then my beloved responds, my beloved is to me. But in this other verse, it's exactly the opposite. Dodi li, my beloved is to me. In other words, the beloved is making the first move. Va'ani lo, and I am his. So Rav Ginsburgh explains this is an example of two verses that are uses the concept soulmates. So I'm just connecting it to this overall idea that when you have verses that when you add them together, or words, and they equal a square number, it's telling us it's not by chance. They're intrinsically connected. Now listen to this. Rav Ginsburgh says meditation. Now remember, we're basing this on 3 words: meditation, prayer, and action. Hitbodedut, tefillah, and maaseh. So he says meditation connects mind to heart. Prayer connects heart to mouth. Action connects mouth to hands. I'm going to say that again. Meditation connects mind to heart. And here, usually when we think of meditation, we think of the mind. We have to quiet the mind so the mind can contemplate peace or whatever it's trying to meditate on. We don't usually think of it necessarily connected to the heart. But the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, where meditation and contemplation are very important concepts to be practiced, the verse that he brings that best encapsulates what meditation is, B'chol libi durashticha. With all my heart, I sought you out. So that's interesting, because we would think he would pick a verse that has to do with the mind, with the intellect. But no, he says, with all my heart, meaning in Jewish meditation, the meditation always has to be drawn down to the heart. It can start in the mind, but then it needs to be drawn down to the heart, unified with the heart. Jerry, yes, contemplation and meditation are virtually the same thing. Okay, so that's meditation connects mind to heart. Prayer connects heart to mouth. Now, what does that mean? This is it's actually Jewish law, is that when we pray, specifically the Amidah, which is called the standing prayer, but some people call it the silent prayer. And yet, the halacha is that when we say the words of the Amidah, that we have to be moving our lips and we have to be enunciating the words, and ideally being able to hear them in our ears. But not that other people should hear, because that would interfere with their prayers. So that's what he means here when he says prayer connects heart to mouth. Here, the prayer is coming from the mind and the heart, but it needs to be connected to the mouth, because as we said before, mouth is an action. If we only pray mentally, which is also good, it doesn't have the same force of bringing it into action. Speech is called action. So we want to bring our prayers into action. We want them to be potent. And by saying our prayers, they become potent. And the last one is action connects mouth to hands. So this is the idea that let's say when we say when speech is connected to mitzvot, so it's connecting the mouth to the hands. That's why before many of the mitzvot, first we say a blessing and then we do the action. First, we do the blessing before the action. So that's connecting the mouth to the hands. So he continues, there is something special about hands. And this is going to be a repeat of the first tweet. He says, there is something special about hands. When lifted, they ascend above the head, and when lowered, they can descend below the feet. What does this mean? It means that as important as meditation and prayer may be, action is the main thing. This is a very, very important principle. Meditation and prayer, of course, are important. But he's saying as important as meditation and prayer are, the main thing is action. Why? It connects heaven and earth. That's what we said before. The hands, which can go above and below, represent this idea of action being connected to above and below. In a certain way, if everything is mental, then it's only above. It's not being manifest below here in this world. Then Rav Ginsburgh says, the greatest joy is in performing an actual mitzvah. In other words, as great as meditation is and prayer, he says the greatest joy is in performing an actual mitzvah. And once the Arizal was asked, what do you do, or what did you do to merit such revelations in Torah? And in two different times, it wasn't the same time. One time he answered, I worked very, very hard. And I think I've said this before. His top student, Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was a genius of genius and was learning all the time. So he said to the Arizal, in surprise, he said, I also worked very hard, but I haven't merited what you merited. And the Arizal, who was known to be extremely humble, answered, but I worked harder than you. He wasn't like building himself up. He was just, that's the fact. In other words, when I say I worked very, very hard, you have to trust that I meant what I said. But the other thing, when he was asked, what did you do to merit such revelations? He said, through the joy of doing mitzvot. In other words, because he would do mitzvot with tremendous joy, he considered it, that is how he merited to such lofty revelations. So that's what Rav Ginsburgh is saying here. The greatest joy is in performing an actual mitzvah. So in other words, someone in theory can learn all about the holiday of Sukkot and learn all the deep intentions of shaking lulav and sitting in a sukkah and really contemplate them and get very, very deep into it, very, very elevated, very high. But none of that touches actually shaking lulav and sitting in a sukkah. In other words, that's where you can connect heaven and earth, because you've learned all of the high intentions. But what about doing it? So that obviously is a main concept of all of Judaism. All of Judaism is this idea that we have to take the mind, the heart, and the hands. Meditation, prayer, and action. Hitbodedut, tefillah, and maaseh, and put them together. And Rav Ginsburgh continues. In particular, Maimonides teaches that the mitzvah which gives the greatest joy of all Everyone could try to figure out what he's going to say now. According to Maimonides, what mitzvah brings the greatest joy? So Maimonides says charity. Charity makes everyone happy. The person giving, again, this is ideally, many people give and they're not very joyous about it. But he's talking about from a spiritual point of view. When we give, it should bring us great joy. The person receiving, of course, is joyous because they're receiving. And God, who commanded us to give charity, is also very happy when we fulfill his mitzvot, but especially the mitzvot of being kind to other people. When our hands reaches out and opens to give, it exceeds the power of our mind to comprehend, of our mouth to express ourselves, and of our feet to pursue a goal. Rav Ginsburgh is being very poetic here, but what he's saying is just so important. I'm going to read it again. When our hand reaches out and opens to give, it exceeds the power of our mind to comprehend, of our mouth to express ourselves, and of our feet to pursue a goal. So here, that's how Rav Ginsburgh ends this. I want to add here something that many people probably have heard, but the Baal Shem Tov said that when we give charity, we are manifesting God's name in the world. How is that? The first letter of God's four-letter name is a Yud. That's the coin. Again, the coin represents giving charity. But a coin, it's like a little Yud. Then the next letter in God's name is a Hey. We take that and we're holding it in our 5 fingers. Hey equals 5. Then we reach out our arm and it becomes a Vav. And the person receiving the money reaches out their 5 fingers, which is the final Hey of God's name, and receives the money. This is a very, very famous teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. Very, very, very classic. This idea of by giving charity, we are literally acting out and manifesting God's name in the world. Okay, next comes a tweet, meaning just a short little saying here. So Rav Ginsburgh says, only mitzvot accompany us to the grave. In Hebrew, the word grave also means womb. One of the meanings of womb is cognate with grave. So Rav Ginsburgh says, do a mitzvah, bury your ego, and be reborn. Again, he's being very, very poetic here, but in a deep way. So in other words, the only thing we take to the grave are the mitzvot that we did, especially the good deeds that we did. And here the word grave and womb actually go together. So he says, the grave part is bury your ego, do a mitzvah, like for pure intentions, and what will happen? You will be reborn in that moment. It will be a moment of rebirth. Very, very beautiful ideas. Okay, l'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol niyeh b'dvaro. I just want to say I'm doing a double mitzvah here. I did the mitzvah making a bracha, but what I'm drinking here, and I have to applaud my wife, who I picked lemons from our lemon tree, and my wife squeezed them, and so I'm drinking the produce from the Holy Land, which is a very, 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 very special mitzvah. To plant a tree in Eretz Yisrael and then to eat or drink its fruit is a very special thing. So l'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. And actually today, right before the class, up to about 10 minutes before, my son and I were picking our pomegranate tree. And we were able to pick, I don't know, at least 50 pomegranates, at least, from 2 trees. I have now 4 or 5 more trees, but they ripen later. And we also juice them. Anyways, so even talking about mitzvot, right, inspires us. Okay, let's see. The next one is a very long one. We're going to come back to it. And so is the next one. So is the next one. Well, okay, which one should we do? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mostly read this. Because if I started explaining a lot of these things, it would take too long. You know what? No, I don't want to rush through any of these, tell you the truth. So what I will do is I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about the upcoming month of Elul. I didn't prepare this, so I'm just going to grab what comes to my mind, because we're about to enter into one of the most important cycles of the whole year. Is from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur is 40 days. And these 40 days correspond to the last 40 days that Moshe was on Mount Sinai. Moshe was on Mount Sinai 3 times for 40 days. The first time was to receive the Torah. He was there for 40 days. When he came down, though, he broke the tablets because of the golden calf. But then he went up the next day to pray for forgiveness. And he was there for 40 days. And then after the 40 days, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, God said, come up for another 40 days, and I will give you the second tablets. And during those 40 days, God revealed the 13 midot rachamim, the 13 aspects of compassion. And these are very, very important because for Sfardim, right from Rosh Chodesh Elul, they begin saying these special prayers called slichot every single day for the entire month of Elul up to Rosh Hashanah. And the main part of slichot are the 13 aspects of compassion. Ashkenazim wait to depending on the year, but let's just say approximately anywhere from 4 to 7 days before Rosh Hashanah. And Ashkenazim begin saying Slichot then. But these 40 days represent God's forgiveness for the golden calf. And for us, every year, it applies to each and every person. So we're about to enter into a cycle of 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul to Yom Kippur. And tonight we were talking very, very, very much about meditation, contemplation. This is the month of doing that, what's called cheshbon nefesh, of making an accounting. This is a golden opportunity for all of us to look at where we're coming from, what we did this year, what we hope to do in the coming year, what do we need to be able to do that, how do we fix certain things, how do we improve, refine, purify, open up, and get ready to give birth to ourselves again. That is the month of Elul that is coming up. And what is very, very important to mention is we usually think of Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of creation. It's called the new year. And we tend to think of that's when creation began. But according to tradition, Rosh Hashanah is the 6th day of creation, the day that human beings are created. And the 2nd day of Rosh Hashanah was the first Shabbat, Shabbat Bereshit. And so then when did creation start? According to tradition, the 25th day of Elul. Now, why that's important is, again, we tend to think of the time to do tshuva is between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The time to connect to newness is between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And that is true. But what's truer is that it's happening already in Elul. Creation starts in Elul, and so should tshuva begin in Elul, and not to wait till Rosh Hashanah to wake up and like, oh my gosh, I didn't do anything in Elul, and it's already Rosh Hashanah. So I'm trying to give everyone a heads up here that the month of Elul is really a golden opportunity to revisit our goals, to revisit our purpose in this world, revisit our mission in this world, our relationships, our goals, where we're coming from and where we're going. So all of this is tomorrow night. It's a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. So the first of Elul is actually Thursday night and Friday. That begins Elul. And we begin blowing the shofar on Rosh Chodesh Elul. The second day of Rosh Chodesh, the first day of Elul, we begin blowing the shofar. So that should tell us already we're not waiting till Rosh Hashanah to do tshuva. Already the shofar is a wake-up call. That's what Maimonides called the shofar, a wake-up call. And that's the prophets also. It's time to wake up, and it's time for something new. So I just want to bless everyone. Take advantage of the month of Elul. Do a spiritual accounting, a practical accounting, contemplate, meditate, and do. So meditation, prayer, and action. That were the themes of tonight's teachings from Rav Ginsburgh, really. Meditation, prayer, and action. And Elul is the perfect time to practice all of this.